Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C., and these are the headlines of the hour. US Secretary of State Blinken meets his Turkish counterpart amid Ankara's objection to Sweden and Finland's NATO bids. Five states hold primaries in run-up to midterm elections in the US. Two Trump-backed candidates win, but two fall short. A Russian soldier on trial for committing war crimes in Ukraine, as part of the first case of its kind since Moscow launched its invasion, pleads guilty of the charges. Global oil prices rise on expectations that easing COVID restrictions in China will boost demand. Rise also supported by ongoing supply concerns on account of the Ukraine war. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un mobilizes military medics to combat COVID in the capital, Pyongyang, as the country faces an explosion of virus cases since last week. Hello and welcome. The Turkish foreign minister is set to meet US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken today. It's a meeting crucial for both sides, as it's the first step towards repairing ties between the two NATO allies. But casting a shadow over the visit is Turkey's threat to veto Sweden and Finland's NATO bids. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has refused to endorse the move, saying the Nordic states are harbouring terrorists. Now, Erdogan even urged other NATO allies to respect Turkey's concerns.
Scandinavian countries are guest houses for terrorist organizations. Members of PKK, DHPKC are hiding in Sweden and the Netherlands. They are even members of the parliament in some countries. At this point, it is not possible for us to take a positive view.
The terrorists he's referring to are Kurdish groups. Erdogan's talking about the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or the PKK. Turkey's labelled them as a terror group, and Erdogan says that Sweden is harbouring them. Now, Sweden does have a sizable Kurdish population. Many of them have made it all the way to parliament, but there's no pieces of evidence of their links to the PKK. This makes this visit even more crucial. Anthony Blinken will address Turkey's concerns and try to prevent the country from moving further away from the West. NATO needs the approval of Turkey to admit new members. So here, Erdogan has a trump card. In return, he could ask from Washington for weapons or for sanctions to be lifted. Currently, one of Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu's objectives is to persuade Washington to allow the sale of F-16 fighter jets to Turkey. Well, to get more on this, our correspondent Susan Tarani is joining us live from New York City. Well, Susan, look, lots for the two men to discuss during this meeting, and it's taking place a day before President Biden welcomes both the Swedish and Finnish leaders to the White House. So how important is the issue of NATO membership for the United States?
Very important indeed. As you mentioned, Nick, a lot of issues on the table. Anthony Blinken on Sunday said that he's confident that this conversation with the Turkish foreign minister will go and move in the right direction. Another talking point that's been sort of hovering over these talks is the fact that President Erdogan has elections coming up in Turkey, and perhaps that's also a point that he's taking into consideration in bringing up the issue of Finland and Sweden not and being reluctant in joining NATO, because he wants to really present that stance among the Turkish public that he's very serious about the issue of the organizations and the Kurdish issue for his population. So that's one aspect of it. He said that this is not a hostile issue. We just want these two countries to stay in the quote-unquote NATO waiting room. However, what's happening with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the NATO Secretary General has made very clear that the joining of Finland and Sweden will be very a positive effect for NATO, and they hope to move this forward as swiftly as possible. Many analysts believe that ultimately Turkey will come around. However, as you mentioned, it hopes to perhaps gain something out of this resistance and these talks. And if it's going to be some sort of fighter jet or military equipment from the United States, which it had been chastised before because it made some dealings with Russia previously, and now perhaps it could, first of all, get that sort of those condemnations off the table and get something out of it from the United States in terms of military equipment and fighter jets, and then reach an agreement, then that would be the best case scenario. And also on the home front, again, Erdogan did pose this opposition, this firm stance with the elections coming up, then that would be a win-win scenario. But we'll see what happens. It is a very important issue indeed, and for it to be resolved and which way it moves, it's important for the United States. It's also important for Turkey as well.
Well, Susan, as you mentioned, some very strong bargaining chips there that Erdogan has that he could potentially play. What do you expect? Do you think we're going to see any breakthroughs or any major agreements coming out of this meeting between the US and Turkey?
We'll probably see some sort of statement coming out from both sides. Whether or not it'll be a breakthrough or not, it's very hard to tell. I think it'll set the groundwork and the framework of what's to come. But ultimately, as I mentioned, I think it's important for the United States to at least save face after this meeting, especially as it comes on the sideline of two very important meetings here in New York at the United Nations. And it's a time when the United Nations is hosting, is a president of the Security Council. It's very important for it to come out with some at least substantial positive note before Anthony Blinken leaves New York. Whether or not it'll be a breakthrough statement, that's probably a step too far, but we'll wait and see.
Thank you, Susan. That was Susan Turani joining us live from New York City. Moving on now to the United States midterm elections, and it was a night of primaries across 5 major US states on Tuesday. 7 more states are scheduled to hold their primaries this week. The results indicate a historic midterm election this year. Let's have a look at some of the winners and some of the most important contests that took place last night. Well, in Pennsylvania, let's start there. There were crowded primaries on both sides in the Senate race to replace a retiring Republican Senator, Patrick J. Toomey. The Republican GOP side has drawn the most attention because of television personality Mehmet Oz, who was endorsed by Donald Trump. And on the other side, the Democratic Party's John Fetterman is projected to win, while votes are still being counted. Onto the gubernatorial race, also in Pennsylvania. Once again, Trump-endorsed candidate Senator Doug Mastriano. He's projected to win there. And Josh Shapiro from the Democratic side has won the gubernatorial primary unopposed. Moving on to North Carolina. Both parties have their sights set on the seat that was opened up by retiring Senator Richard Burr. This will be a key target in the battle for the Senate in November. Republicans had over a dozen candidates, and Representative Ted Budd is a clear winner. He too was endorsed by Donald Trump. Former State Supreme Court Justice Sherry Beasley is the winner on the Democratic side. Shifting our focus to Idaho's Senate race, backed by Trump's endorsement, incumbent Senator Mike Crapo will likely have his 5th term in office. And David Roth from the blue side is leading the race against Ben Pursley. And in the gubernatorial race in Idaho, incumbent Republican Governor Brad Little is fighting for a 2nd term against his own Lieutenant Governor Janice Mjigic. Little has been projected to win, with around 93% of the votes already counted. And educator Stephen Haidt is running for the Democratic nomination, unopposed. Meanwhile, Hunter Biden is back in the news. More than 120,000 emails that were found on Hunter Biden's discarded laptop have now been posted online. The man behind the move is Garrett Ziegler, a former aide to Peter Navarro, who used to work in the Office of Trade and Policy Manufacturing during Trump's presidency. He uploaded the emails to a searchable database. Now, one of the emails is the one in which Hunter Biden's business partner appears to suggest that Hunter should hold 10% of the equity in their multi-million-dollar deal with the Chinese. This is on behalf of Hunter Biden's father and current US President Joe Biden. Garrett Ziegler released these emails through his organisation called Marco Polo. The organisation describes itself as a non-profit research group, and it says it aims at exposing corruption and investigating with right-wing support. For the first time in over 50 years, a US House of Representatives committee has held a formal public hearing on unidentified aerial phenomena. During the rare hearing, the Pentagon reported that there's been a significant rise in UAP activity in the last 20 years that US military pilots have observed since 2004. UAPs are more commonly known as unidentified flying objects, or UFOs, but it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with extraterrestrials. These could range from birds to military jets. However, it still does not rule out any possibility. The officials also made it clear that the primary interest of studying UAPs is to tackle possible national security threats. Two senior US defense intelligence officials said that the Pentagon was committed to determining the origins of unidentified aerial phenomena. However, they acknowledged that many of the phenomena remain beyond the government's ability to explain. 2 UAP video clips were also shown during the hearing.
Any given observation may be fleeting or longer. It may be recorded or not. It may be observable by one or multiple assets. In short, there's rarely an easy answer. For example, let me share with you the first video that we have here today, which shows an observation in real time.
The Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence also said that the number of UAPs officially catalogued by the newly formed Pentagon Task Force has grown to 400 cases. However, Pentagon officials did not disclose additional information from their ongoing investigation of these unexplained sightings in the sky. They pledged that the Pentagon would follow evidence wherever it took them. The US President Joe Biden addressed the latest burst of race-related violence, condemning what he called the poison of white supremacy, and he promised that hate will not prevail in the US. He further called the mass shooting in Buffalo simple and straightforward terrorism.
What happened here is simple and straightforward. Terrorism. Terrorism. Domestic terrorism. Violence inflicted in the service of hate and the vicious thirst for power that defines one group of people being inherently inferior to any other group.
Biden visited the scene of Saturday's racist massacre in Buffalo, New York. It's a predominantly black neighborhood of the city. Biden called out those who've pushed the Great Replacement theory, a belief that white Americans are being systematically replaced by immigrants and minorities.
A hate that through the media and politics, the internet, has radicalized, angry, alienated, lost, and isolated individuals into falsely believing that they will be replaced, that's the word, replaced, by the other, by people who don't look like them, and who are therefore in a perverse ideology that they possess and being fed lesser beings. I and all of you reject the lie. I call on all Americans to reject the lie. And I condemn those who spread the lie for power, political gain, and for profit.
A shooter, a mass shooter type shit. Hey, look at it here, young boys.
Shifting our focus now to Cuba, an island that was once called the Venice of the Caribbean, but is now fighting to stay afloat. Climate catastrophes and political crises have forced residents to abandon their homes, but some are reluctant to leave.
Once the COVID-19 pandemic hit, borders were shut. People resisted stepping out, and the world was put to a standstill. It was a nightmare for countries that heavily depended on tourism. One such nation was Cuba. Number of tourists fell drastically and their borders remained closed for the longest. But for one Cuban town, it was like deja vu. This is how Isabela de Sahua used to look like back in 1985. This is the town now. It used to be a blooming coastal area. Tourists swamped from worldwide, pumping local businesses. It was known as the Venice of Cuba. But then in 1985, the unthinkable happened. Cyclone Kate wiped out its USP. The floating wooden houses, number of incoming tourists depleted. It affected businesses and the local economy.
When I came back after the cyclone, I was in the shelters in Sagua. I came, and when I arrived, I found my house completely destroyed. Made of wood, I lost my TV, I lost my radio, my food, my clothes. I was left with nothing.
But the locals did not give up. Even after authorities offered better housing in a neighboring island, they refused to abandon their land. For 37 years, generations after generations, people of this town have been rebuilding what was lost.
Sagua was too industrial and the rest was exported through here. The port was dredged according to the drafts. The last time I think it was dredged to 27 or 28 feet or something like that. Bigger ships came in, followed by many bigger ships and so on. The port was the life of this town, but unfortunately it no longer exists.
It used to have a booming port where boats full of sacks of sugar, carafes of honey and alcohol set sail. Channels were formed between the rustic dwellings. But in 1990, with the fall of socialist camp, the port fell a victim. Today, the town is dedicated to fishing and depending largely on remittances. Climate change also continued to promote wearing. In September 2017, Hurricane Irma made landfall as a Category 5. Half of the population has abandoned that idyllic corner of the Cuban coast. And with poor housing and slumping economy, it is hard to keep up the morale.
There are thousands of local residents here who do not want to leave. What is happening that the housing conditions are very bad. If new housing could be built here, no one would leave.
Bureau Report, WION. Wild is one.
Beekeepers in Israel have come up with a high-tech solution to save the dying population of bees. There's been a sharp decline in the population of these vital pollinators due to increased environmental threats like habitat destruction and climate change. But can technology really help?
Bee Home, which is a project by startup Beewise in Israel that houses up to 24 hives, has developed a high-tech surveillance system that allows beekeepers to remotely treat their hives and care for their bees. It seems like a regular home to the bees, but allows caretakers to inspect the hive's condition more efficiently.
Bees are dying around the world. More than 30% of colonies die each year. We identified that issue and came up with a technological solution, as there wasn't one. We developed a robotic beehive in which there is a beekeeping robot that constantly monitors what is happening inside the beehive, allowing beekeepers to receive real-time alerts and take care of the colonies.
Featuring artificial intelligence, bee homes are equipped with sensors. These robotic hives are solar-powered, have adjustable temperature and can perform various essential functions.
The beekeeper can take action remotely without having to physically access the hive. He can monitor the expansion and reduction of the hive, move the honeycomb, collect honey, and check on the queen's health. Can basically do a general inspection of the hive and its conditions.
Traditional hives called Langstroth box were designed almost 150 years ago. The Israeli project Beewise aims to address the inefficiencies of the common hives and decrease the mortality rate of bees. It was launched in 2018 and has raised around $80 million to develop its exports. About 100 of these hives are functional in Israel. The dozen others sent to the United States. Bureau Report. WION World is One.
Finally today, the Cannes Film Festival is underway, and on the first day there was an unexpected guest walking the red carpet. We leave you to find out who. I'm Nick Harper in Washington DC. Thanks for watching.
Également à l'affiche de The French Dispatch. On a vu récemment Seules les bêtes de Dominique Moll, J'accuse de Roman Polanski, Les Misérables de l'Algérie, réalisateur et scénariste français qui est maintenant membre du jury. Et à l'affiche également de Curiosa de Lou Genet. Le chant, Blanche comme neige, Dame Fontaine.
This is right, Arab.